hard to do for 20 seconds, isn't it? Hello and welcome to The Habit Architect. My name is Michael Cups and I'm really excited about this episode, and we're going to get to our guest in just a moment. But thank you so much for joining. You can see this on LinkedIn, you can see it on YouTube, and also after it's recorded, you can see it on, or you can listen to it on all the podcast channels, Spotify, etc., that you enjoy getting your podcast from. So please share it with a friend and subscribe and like our episodes, if you will. So the guest today, I'm really excited about. They're with Intentional Marriages, Danielle and Russ, and I've had the opportunity to know them for some years, and I can't wait to introduce them and get into a very significant, what I think is significant habit that couples can start on immediately and enjoy the benefits from. Before that, just a reminder, a sponsor is Time Bandit. You can go to timebandit.io. We have do-it-yourself programs with the book, the app, and a new AI coach, or we can do it with you with personal coaching and team coaching. So be sure to check out timebandit.io. All right, let's get to this fun topic. And I guess you could say sometimes marriages aren't fun, but this is a path to make them more fun. Let's start with just a quick. We're going to talk about a habit that you guys built called check-in, but let's start with introductions to get to know you a little bit. So Russ and Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. It's such an honor to be able to do this today. Loved our friendship over the years, and we really appreciate the opportunity. And hello, everyone. I'm Russ West, and this is my better half.
Hi, I'm Danielle.
So
great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. We're so excited about today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to get this topic. I think this is so relevant for so many people. So let's get to it. Let's start first. Talk about You've started a nonprofit called Intentional Marriages, and we can get to that in just a minute. But maybe tell us a little bit about, kind of what led you here. How did you get to intentionalmarriages.net, and how and what is the motivation and values behind it?
Sure. So it's kind of funny to start. So not funny. If you go way back, I got divorced about 20 something years ago, and when I got divorced, it led me to counseling for the first time. And when I got into counseling, oh my goodness, it was so humbling. What I learned was what my role was in the state of the marriage and the divorce, and how my childhood was impacting my marriage and parenting and my work. Growing up, my father was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And I started learning how that was impacting me, both positively and negatively, but especially negatively in the marriage. And so after the divorce, several months later, I was introduced to Danielle, and we became friends. And several months after that, we started dating. And several months after that, we started getting serious. And then when we started getting serious, I said, hey, you need to come meet my counselor so you can really find out who you're getting involved with here. He'll tell you what you're getting involved with. And so when she came to counseling, she did find out more who she was getting involved with, but also she found out some things from her past and her childhood. She had not been married before, but she started learning things that was impacting her life and, would impact our marriage. And so we get married, and we, continued to go to counseling. We had spent about 1.5 years in counseling before we got married. And so as we got into counseling, we saw these things that we were learning, these tools and skills and processes were helping our marriage. And so we started sharing them with folks. In parallel, at the same time we got married, we started attending our church, North Point Community Church, has an incredible marriage class. And we started attending that. So we started learning things from there, learning things from our counselor, and sharing with there was work helping us so much. So we started sharing with friends and family. And after a while, they said, hey, would you mentor us on marriage? And we're like, I'm not sure we're qualified to mentor anybody on marriage. I've been divorced, And they're like, no, please. And so we said we'd try it. And as we did it, people started referring to friends and family. And that we started mentoring people in 2012. And then in 2015, we started Intentional Marriages. And it's basically a website, intentionalmarriages.net. And Danielle started doing blogs and YouTube videos on marriage. And we continued to mentor. I was working as a software sales rep. So we would do this mentoring on nights and weekends. And then this past March, I decided to leave my 30-year software career and do this full time with Danielle. And Michael, believe it or not, we've mentored over 300 couples over the years.
Wow. Nice. Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. I didn't realize you had gone to that scale yet. That's a lot of lives right there because
Yeah.
Danielle, 300 couples, that's two people and then they may have children and they may have others that are impacted. That ecosystem is amazing. Have you always wanted to kind of give back to the community in that way, Danielle?
We love giving back to the community, but what was harder for me, Russ is the open book. I'm really private. So to go in there and share that I actually cried, I was struggling in our first year of marriage because Russ kept hurting my feelings. And I thought if he would just behave differently, we'd have a great marriage. I didn't fully understand my role at that point. So it was the fact that I would even share that kind of stuff with other people was much harder for me. But what happened over time, and this is part of our values of intentional marriages, is when I started to become transparent, I would receive, oh yeah, us too. I'm like, you too? Like you guys are doing, like, I thought it was just us that needed to go to counseling. And so that transparency led me to be more vulnerable. And vulnerable just feels weak, but others receive it as powerful. And so I started to see the power in allowing others in. And so I'm more like the onion where it took a while to kind of peel back the layers. But so that ended up becoming part of our values is transparency, vulnerability, and intentionality.
Yeah, and I think in my first marriage, I was trying to be a great husband. Because of my childhood, I needed to be a good husband, right? I didn't want, and so it wasn't lack of effort. It was a lack of knowledge of having skills and tools and processes that few people ever teach us before we get married.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's not something you learn in school. And a lot of times it's not even something our parents kind of teach us. But before we keep going, I love this conversation. I saw Butch said that he has Butch Nicholson. I think you may know him, Russ. He says, looking forward to the conversation. Lots of friends have benefited greatly from your work already. And Reem says 300. Wow, amazing. And the work you're doing has a significant impact. So great to see those comments coming on. And feel free, before we got started, Russ and Danielle said they'd take any questions. So do pop your questions in the chat and we'll fire it off to Danielle and Russ. So that's an incredible story of how you get there. And I love founder stories that actually talk about why they got there and how they got there. And that first year of marriage story that you guys have is powerful. So this is the Habit Architect. And we talk about habits and we talk about sustaining habits, building habits, the things around that. And you guys, when we were doing prep, you had a wonderful habit to talk about. So I think I got it right. You call it the check-in, right?
The weekly check-in.
Weekly check-in. So why don't you talk to us about what is it and why is it important? And then we'll go into the mechanics after that. So let's start with that. What is it and why?
So it's a weekly exercise that helped us being intentional. And we discuss 4 things. Now you can make up whatever things that you want to discuss of it, but the 4 things that we would review every week is our schedule, our hopes and dreams, and frustrations and celebrations. And just real briefly, the schedule is just about looking at our logistics for the week. The hopes and dreams, that's going to sound excessive. Like, really, you discuss your hopes and dreams every week? Yes, we did. And we'll talk more about that. And then the frustrations is a little bit more daunting for couples because we're going to review things that may have hurt us throughout the week, but it's a good clearinghouse, right? And there's a process we take people through on that. And that Russ will go into detail later. And then the celebrations. Basically, let's celebrate what went right this week.
Right. That's great. And there's a great question. Should we take it now or do you want to, let's go through the check-in a bit more. Or do you want to take the question now? But
we're open.
Whatever you think is best. Let's see the question.
What's one common mistake you make earlier in the relationship that may affect long-term?
I'll answer it first and I'll let Russ add. I think what we see most commonly is we're good. We're going to coast. And we're going to let little things just kind of brush them under the rug. They're not that big of a deal. And it's the fear of trying to discuss things just to keep the peace. Those are the most common that we see not addressing.
And if you tie the core values, our 3 core values are vulnerability, transparency, and being intentional. So the common mistake couples make early is they're not intentional in their marriage, right? They're intentional in their job, and they're intentional in their health or working out, their finances, but we're not very intentional in our marriage. And so I think that not being intentional, coasting like or thinking everything's fine, or hey, we love each other, this is all going to work out, right? So,
and this is something we had to learn from counseling. This exercise. This isn't something we came up with.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Reem, for the question as well. And that's a great response. And we do just sometimes we do it in all facets of our lives. We just try to get, let's not disrupt things. And there's a thing, I do a deal on Saturday mornings with Smart Recovery. And one of the sayings that I've heard there is that shame thrives in silence and dies in the open. And there's a correlation there, right? When you put the problem out there, you can both solve it. It'll advance both of your concerns, right?
So say that again. I'm gonna borrow that one a few times, Michael. Shame thrives in silence.
Shame thrives in silence and dies in the open.
Great. That's wonderful. I'm definitely going to use that. Well, you ask, why, to your question about why this matters so much, right? This weekly check-in. So talk a little bit about when we were doing counseling and we were in the premarital piece of this before we got married. Our counselor, he's been doing family therapy for 45 years. And he said that he believed, it was just his opinion, that if you take the percentage of couples who get divorced, it didn't matter what percentage you pick, and add that to the percentage of couples who never get divorced but never have a healthy, thriving marriage, he believed that combined percentage was 85 to 90% of couples. Wow. Right? Mm-hmm. And so that scared us to death. It scared us to death. Right. And so then then he said, Russ and Danielle, what makes you think you're going to be in the 10 to 15% club of having a long-term, healthy, thriving marriage? It didn't mean you wouldn't have any challenges. Every marriage has tension, conflict over time. Yeah. And the punchline was, it wasn't going to be just because we loved each other or we were compatible. It was going to we would only be in that club if we were willing to work hard on our marriage, be intentional and work hard on our marriage. Right. And so with all the 300 plus couples we've worked with, Michael, this is our opinion of what the hardest thing is in marriage. Right. And so just our opinion, and that is, it's the hardest thing is managing the tension that comes up on a regular basis, if not daily basis, of bumping into each other's subconscious wounds, subconscious fears, and subconscious expectations we have on each other. Right. Right. Yep. And so what is a healthy marriage? You may say, when we said 85 to 90% of couples don't have a healthy, thriving marriage. To us, a healthy marriage has the characteristics of both spouse being emotionally safe, both spouse learning communication skills to be able to communicate in a way that doesn't make the other person feel attacked or blamed, like to be able to share a frustration without pushing them away or making them feel blamed or attacked, right? Yeah. Being able to resolve conflict, not avoid conflict. Avoiding conflict's not healthy, right? But being able to resolve it in a healthy way that draws you closer to each other instead of pushing each other away. For us, it was understanding how our past, our childhood, how does that impact our marriage? Even the best childhoods is going to create an expectation of the way the holidays are going to work or the way we're going to communicate, right? Even if you had the best of childhood. So that's what a healthy, looks like. But, back to managing this tension, why it's so important to do this check-in, this tension we talk about. There's some real famous marriage therapists called Dr. John and Julie Gottman. And the Gottmans are really well-known marriage therapists. And they've done decades of research on marriage. And they claim that 69% of our problems in marriage are perpetual and not fixable. So they become tensions to manage, not problems to fix. But for us fixers, right? Yes. We need to be able to fix. You give me a problem, I'm going to fix it. And that's usually our superpower at work, right? But our fix-it mentality is not a superpower. It's an Achilles heel in marriage.
And what we try to remind couples too is like, oh, the grass has got to be greener on the other side. I'm going to get out of this marriage and go to the next one. And I'm like, okay, well, you're just letting go of this 69% of the problem and you're going to pick up somebody else's 69%. So it's like Russ said, learning how to manage the tension instead of trying to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this weekly check-in is one of those habits that can address that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Correct.
I mean, we talk about, schedule hopes and dreams. I mean, like you said, who thinks about talking about hopes and dreams every week, frustrations and celebrations? So walk us through this, if you would.
Sure. And the schedule's the easy one, right? I mean, it's just a lot of people do that, but it's really important to each week look at the schedule. You get the obvious benefits of being aligned and not being blindsided during the week. But it's neat. You'll find when you do these things that things you haven't thought about will come up. You'll have benefits. So for us, example, I would share with Danielle, hey, on Tuesday, I've got this really important meeting with a customer and I'm a little anxious about the presentation, about the meeting. And it never failed. At 1:59, I would get a text that would say, hey, I'm praying for you, praying for your meeting. I never asked her to do that. That was just something because she knew that those were important. There were important things on my schedule during the week. She would just shoot me a little text ahead of time right beforehand. And it gave me a lot of peace. And she's been doing that for years. But once again, I didn't ask for it. It just came out of the fact that we were reviewing the schedule each week.
Right. And he would know I had let's say I had a difficult lunch I had to go to, and he would be like, how did it go? So it's like being able to enter each other's world.
Yeah. So when you talk about the schedule, it's not just that where you're going to be on Tuesday, but that you go a little bit deeper to say, this is an important part of my week for whatever reason, anxiety or hope or whatever. And it's addressing that. So I'm anxious to get to the rest of it. But so with that in mind, do you suggest that couples do this on a Sunday evening, a Monday morning, Saturday? Does it matter? Is there a frequency that you kind of just want them to be diligent about?
So what we did, because I'm a night owl and Russ is a morning person, those times wouldn't work for us, right? So we picked like noon on Saturdays to take a walk. And our kids were 8 and 12, and we just walked in the neighborhood. And for me, I'm more of, and we talk about how couples can have more turtle-like behavior where they kind of shy away from conflict. And then there's some that are tigers. And so for me, knowing that part of this weekly check-in, we're going to be talking about frustrations, I needed something that was a little bit less confrontational. So walking side by side on a walk was good for me, but we also committed to being emotionally safe, which is another part of, having a successful weekly check-in. So the Saturdays worked out well for us.
Yeah. So you have to figure out what fits if you're both night owls, you can pick a night. If you're both early morning, you can pick an early morning. But for us, we had to get a little more creative. And plus during the week was hard because, it was always so focused on work. And Danielle mentioned the kids were 8 and 12 when we got married. So that's when we first started this. And
part of the problem is we will meet couples and they're like, we're so busy. We're working 2 jobs. I just had a baby. Like, I don't have time for this. And I said, you know what? We don't have the perfect answer for this. But what I will tell you is I'm going to fast forward your life, because we are sitting with empty nesters who are crushed because guess what? They got to launching their kids well, but they didn't launch their marriage well, because now they're in the supposed to be the best part of their lives, right? Enjoying the empty nester stage, and they don't like each other. And so we're saying, if you can find 5 minutes, check in, just be intentional in checking in. It doesn't have to be a half hour or an hour long. Just check in.
And not only that made me not like each other, they don't know each other. They don't believe they've been married for decades, but they don't truly know each other's dreams and hopes and
because they were living parallel lives.
They were, they were distracted with kids and careers. Now the kids are out of the house and careers are winding down, and all of a sudden, who is this person, right? And so, the one time Michael will say, "No, here's a place not to do it is in the car driving."
Yeah.
So, and I will explain. I'm going to describe something in a few minutes that then I'll tie that back in. But don't ever do the weekly check-in when you're driving.
Yeah. I can already think of several things that do that, and I also something Danielle said about. Anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent on mine, but some of the things I do with Time Bandit is about tying your habits to your values, and if your value is you're going to make time for the right things, right?
When people say they don't have time, we're like, no, you don't. This needs to be marriage needs to be the most of the priority, right?
Yeah,
and so it's hard.
Yeah.
We know a couple where the husband would come in. It's chaos everywhere with the kids, but they knew that mom and dad took those 5 minutes to sit down and check in with each other. Nice. So you can do this on a daily basis and not have to, make this an overwhelming hour-long conversation.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's talk about hopes and dreams weekly.
So hopes and dreams weekly. So I have to tell on Russ a little because we would share our hopes and dreams, and it may seem excessive, but we found a lot of impact in this. So I remember I was sharing a hope and dream with Russ, and I was all excited about it. And Mr. CFO mind over here goes, bum, 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 bum. Oh, we can't afford to do that. Like, no. And I'm like, it's a hope and a dream. Like, don't be such a buzzkill on my dream. And so we came up with a code word. It's not a yes to my dream, but it's not a no. And the word is eventually. Yes. And it just let me live in my, hope and dream. Like, okay, eventually we'll do this, right? Yeah. And yes. So that was something we learned in sharing the hopes and dreams. But here's the key. We want you to dream big, right? You're having those dreams regardless if you're sharing them. And when you share them, it draws you together with your spouse, knowing what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And I love, Russ has been so good at realistically, what can I make come true for you? Like, just him saying that is enough for me, right? And the fact that he wants to try really draws me towards him. So here's another important part of those hopes and dreams that we accidentally learned in doing this exercise. So for years, Russ wanted a beach condo. So, I mean, literally for 2 years, every Saturday, we were like, he talks about this beach condo. And so we came up with the idea, let's pretend to find the ideal beach condo. Let's figure out the numbers. We're not going to execute on this. We're not going to go buy one, but let's just pretend. Where would it be? What would it be like? And so got all the numbers. Again, his CFO brain goes through and analyzes it. And guess what? It's not as financially feasible as we thought, renting it out would pay for it all. It did not work out to be. And guess what? That dream dropped off.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where, as Danielle said, we did the numbers. And then I talked to some friends who lived up here and had beach condos down in Florida. And they weren't trying to talk me out of it. They were just sharing the pros and cons. So what are the pros and cons of it, right? So once again, this would have been 10 years later, we probably would have tried to buy one. And after listening to these guys, after doing the numbers, I literally went to Danielle. I said, "You're not going to believe this. I don't want a beach condo anymore." And I would have wasted 10 or 15 years dreaming about something that I really wasn't a dream. It's an incredible, and now I've learned to, we both learned to, when we have big dreams, to do this, and then it really flushes out whether it's a dream or not. And when it stays that dream, then you also know, hey, here's what I need to do to make it happen too. Right. But Danielle said the key to the hopes and dreams, Michael, is by sharing our hopes and dreams with each other, we are aligned. First, we know what each other. We just assume that their dream is our dream, A. But B, it just connects us, and it builds this emotional connection because our spouse feels we care about what's important to them subconsciously.
Tell them the story about the guy who sold his company.
Yeah. So back to, we just assume our spouse has our dream. There was a guy I heard speak a couple years ago. He just sold his company for $4 billion, right? He was like 62 years old. And he said that, he'd had this dream of getting a boat and selling around the world, right? Literally going all the way around the world in a boat, right? Yeah. And so dreamed for years. And as he got closer, 6 months from getting the deal closed, he just, all he could think about. So the day it closed, he went home and said, "Honey, now we can finally get that boat and travel around the world." So he goes, "What are you talking about? I'm not going on no boat around the world with you." And he just realized he'd been so focused on his business and getting the deal done that he wasn't sharing with her that that's what the plans were as soon as he closed it, right? So I know it's an extreme example, but subconsciously we just kind of assume they want what we want. Another thing is, in addition to sharing the big dreams that are on a weekly basis, maybe, I mean, the same dream, it's also your little dreams, like, hey, I'd like to lose 2 pounds this week, or I'd like to try this new restaurant. Oh, yeah. So you're sharing things, little things too. It's not just the big things.
Yeah. And then they become, for lack of a better word, the couple's dream, the ones that you vet out, and you both, especially those big aspirational ones. Now you have something you're striving for together. That's great. Well, that's great. Well, let's get into maybe more of a negative one, is the frustrations.
Yeah. So we will say is We think this is the most positive one, even though it feels like the most negative one. It feels like it might be the most important. Let's say that it might be the most important.
So before you get into explaining this part of the weekly check-in is why couples will avoid. They will avoid this one because they're like, I'm in such a good mood. I don't want to ruin it for us this weekend. I'm afraid bringing it up again will start another fight, which is why we think it's so important to have a framework to walk through this particular frustration part. So I'll let Russ get into that.
Yeah, and so what this framework does is on a weekly basis, you're practicing it on small things so that when the big things happen, when the big hurt happens or the big frustration happens, you have the skill set and the muscle memory to be able to work through that in a healthy way and feel closer afterwards. So that's the punchline. Literally, when we were taught this process, we were told you can hurt each other or frustrate each other. You can have this conversation, this process, and you will feel closer afterwards. I'm like, that's BS. There's no way you're going to tell me that we can hurt each other on Friday. We can talk about it on Saturday and feel closer on Sunday. I'm like, no, I don't believe that. It is, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing. It's why it takes practice to do it. It's why it's better to practice on the small things. So in a minute, I'm going to give you a more detail on why it's so hard. But let's go through the process first. So what we do is we would start out where one spouse will ask the other. We usually ask the tigers to ask the turtles to go first. So sometimes both are turtles, sometimes both are tigers. And what we mean by that is, when you get frustrated, are you verbally aggressive or do you shut down? So when we have tension or conflict, Danielle shuts down. When we have tension or conflict, I tend to get, we got to get this taken care of right now type thing, right? So you want the turtles to go first because if the tigers go first, the turtles may never even share theirs, right? So I would, as the tiger, I would say, hey, honey, have I done anything to hurt you or frustrate you this week, right? And then she might say, well, the other night at the dinner party, I really felt ignored by you. Now, when the spouse shares their frustration, they're usually going to say 99% of the time, they're going to say something we don't like or we don't agree with, right?
Yeah.
So early in our marriage, if she ever shared that, I would say, what are you talking about? I didn't ignore you. Immediately get on the defensive and try to convince her I didn't ignore her, right?
Yeah.
So instead, this is really important. So when they share their frustration or their hurt, the first thing we want to do is get curious instead of furious, all right? So we want to say, hey, can you tell me more about why you felt ignored? Instead of trying to convince her that she shouldn't feel that way, right? And she might say, well, it felt like you and the guys were talking about football for 2 hours. And I'd say, no, it was 15 minutes. And, it's wow, honey. How did that make you feel when we were talking about, well, it really made me feel disrespected. It made me feel like I'm not a priority. When you do that, when we go into a situation like that, and you're talking football for 2 hours and I'm just standing there, I don't feel like a priority or I feel disrespected. And so, whoa, honey, I don't want you to feel disrespected or what else do you feel when you feel disrespected or not a priority? And she would keep going down. We call it the feeling. We tell people, go to feelingswheel.com and get a feelings wheel, and it'll help you say, because when you say, well, I feel like you're a jerk, that's not a feeling, right? I feel like when you do such and such, you're such a jerk. That's not a feeling. A feeling is I feel alone, abandoned, discouraged, not worthy, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
So you're trying to get them to share more feelings. This is so magical because they feel like you care more about them than your own perspective. We tell people, Michael, if we could get marriage couples to learn one skill, only one skill, is to care more about their spouse's feelings than their own perspective or being right. When they say something we don't like or agree with, instead of trying to convince them they shouldn't feel that way or they're wrong and we're right or our perspective is better, instead care more and ask these curious questions about what they're feeling. And then when she shares this, well, hey, I felt disrespected, I felt not a priority, I felt alone, right? It's me to validate. Here's very important part as well, is to validate their feelings. And what they want to hear is, honey, I can understand why you felt that way. The last thing I want you to do is feel those feelings. Now, this is really important. And being the king of needing to be right and never be wrong, that's me. It took me way too long to be okay that I didn't agree. I don't have to agree that I ignored her to understand she felt ignored and it was very painful.
Yeah.
That's really important, right?
So he cared more about my feelings than his perspective.
Yeah. So most of us, we can't let go of that. If I don't think I did anything wrong, I'm not, I got to convince you of that. Right. So
yeah.
I need to just share that. It doesn't matter whether I ignored her or not. What matters, she felt ignored. Okay. So you validate their feelings. I don't want you to feel that way. The last thing I want you to do is to feel that way. Then she would acknowledge my validation by saying, thank you. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me, something like that. And then I would say, well, honey, what could I do to, what could I do differently next time? What could I do differently to make it better? And she would say, it would really help me if you could just make sure you include me in the conversation. So instead of, if you start talking about football, that's fine. But then maybe if it starts going on a little while, change the topic to something I can be involved in, or even ask me, hey, Danielle, what are your thoughts on such and such? You can kind of bring me into the conversation. She would coach me on what would work. Now this is real important as well. If she shares something that she wishes I would have done differently, I have two responses that we want to do. One is to say, okay, I think I can do that. I'll try very hard. Don't say, oh, absolutely, I'll do that. Because if I didn't do it well the first time, there's a good chance I won't do it well next time. Yeah. And then I made myself a liar, right? Because I committed to something I didn't do. So instead say, hey, honey, I think I can do that and I'll try hard. Or if I think there's a 99% chance I'm going to fail, then I'm going to say, hey, honey, I think it's going to be really hard for me to do that. I wish I could. Maybe we try, what about this? And we've worked together to come up on a joint solution that she feels good about, that we both feel good about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's outstanding. And what's interesting about that is you're addressing some pretty deep fears, probably in some cases, and sometimes just like you said, the always right person, Russ. I can hear that sometimes in myself. I won't say that again, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. But what you're doing is you're working through it together for each other. And what I've heard you say is don't try to continue to prove you're right. Validate what she's feeling and or vice versa, et cetera. So
you're allowing both perspectives to be true. Yeah. That's the key.
And Michael, you talked about fear. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share with you the best thing I've ever learned. I've been in counseling for 26 years from when I got divorced, right? The most important, because it ties into the fear comment and it ties into why this is so hard, why this process can be hard, right? When they say that thing we don't like or agree with, why then it's so hard to do well in this process, and it takes a lot of practice. So if we take the brain and say the front of this is our prefrontal cortex, right? The logical part of our brain. Right underneath is a little almond-shaped piece of our brain called the amygdala, AMYGDALA, right? Which is our fear threat system. So when it gets triggered, it floods us with cortisol and adrenaline to fight, flight, or freeze. And it's designed to hijack the prefrontal cortex. So if we're walking through the woods and a bear crosses our path, you don't want the amygdala and prefrontal cortex negotiating on what to do. It's run, freeze, fight. Of course, hopefully not fight the bear, but you get the point, right? So, and that's great, is our survival mechanism, right? But the challenge is in marriage, as soon as our spouse says or does something we don't like or agree with, that amygdala gets triggered, floods us with cortisol, adrenaline, it hijacks the prefrontal cortex. And then it usually says something or does something that the prefrontal cortex has to apologize for later, right? When you calm down. So here's the most important part. I wish they've got one thing out of this today, it would be this right here. The prefrontal cortex stores memories as pictures. So my dad, being a drug addict and alcoholic, he used to embarrass me really bad when I was growing up, right? All those memories, when I can remember the different things he did to embarrass me, that was my prefrontal cortex keeping that picture with it, right? Here's the key. The amygdala stores all of our memories in the past as emotions with no picture. So how does that play out in marriage? If Danielle does anything to embarrass me, say she corrected me 2 or 3 times while I'm sitting here talking to you, right? On my storytelling. No big deal. That should irritate someone on it too. But has anybody ever had a 10 reaction to a 2 circumstance or overreacted? All of us have, right? Here's why. When Danielle does anything or anybody does anything to embarrass me, my amygdala immediately floods me with the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that my dad embarrassed me, time when my dad embarrassed me. But there's no picture with it. So who do I blame for that horrible feeling?
Yeah.
Right. And so then I just blast her because she's just embarrassed me. And for me, it felt like the world's coming to an end when it's not that big a deal, right? An emotionally healthy person wouldn't have that overreaction. So when we overreact, the more intense our response, the more intense our feeling, our frustration, the more it's about us and what's been bumped into inside of us from the past than the actual circumstance.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's interesting. And that makes a lot of sense to probably everybody that's listening to this too, because they've either flew off the handle before or they had somebody fly off the handle when and they're like, what did I do? So that makes perfect sense. So what about the celebrations? That's the fourth item. I think that's a big one. We could probably talk about that one all day, but what about celebrations? Do you follow these in this order too?
Yes.
Okay.
Always in those celebrations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when we shared, we're doing the weekly check-ins and we told him how we kind of tweaked it and added some stuff in. He goes, what's really important that's missing here is it's easy to focus on what's going wrong, but you need to focus on what's going right. Just a simple thank you, or, you need to dive a little bit deeper. Why did it go right? Well, expand upon that. We all crave encouragement and appreciation, right? And so ending that weekly check-in on, this really meant a lot to me when you did this and this, it's like, okay, I'm being a good wife, or I'm being a good husband. And so we make sure that we end the weekly check-ins with that celebration.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it kind of ties it up there. So let's talk about. Well, did you want to say something else about the celebration, Russ?
No, I think the only thing, Michael, this is one of those that we encourage people also to do almost daily, right?
Yeah.
Find a brag.
Find a brag. Just brag on your spouse each night. Each night before you go to bed, brag on your spouse.
Leave a Post-it note for them in the morning by the coffee cup.
Yeah, that makes sense. But by the way, Billy Leonard, you may know him. He says, "Love you guys."
We love Billy and his wife.
Yeah, very good, excellent. Well, so okay, so we talk about habits. This is a weekly habit. What is the time for? I mean, so if somebody, I'm sure the first few are longer than they get. But so how much time do you spend each week on the check-in itself?
So. In the beginning, it was much longer.
Yep.
Because we have practiced this so much, our frustration conversations, as a turtle, I had to park it and wait till I knew that he was emotionally safe. So this is something that's really important in the weekly check-in. There's 4 behaviors that are detrimental to a marriage, and they are being defensive, being critical, being contempt, having an air of superiority, and stonewalling, shutting down. Those are not behaviors that are emotionally safe. So we had to come to this conversation, this weekly check-in, with the commitment that he wasn't going to do his typical behaviors. I wasn't going to shut down, right? That was my easy go-to, because And just to all the turtles out there, my heart goes out to you, because it's so hard for us to be in these conflict-oriented conversations, is that our shutting down is just as damaging as somebody being a verbal aggressor. And that shocked me, because I thought I was the nice one in the conversation. I wasn't saying anything mean. I just went away for 3 days. And I would have gone on longer if Russ would let me. So being emotionally safe means that I'm not going to shut down. It means that Russ, even though he didn't like what I just said, he is going to bite his tongue as hard as he can and let me, share my thoughts. It means being a good listener and repeating back. Did I hear you correctly? It's making sure that your spouse feels heard and understood. That's emotional safety. And I'm telling you, that phrase, it never came up in my family of origin. And even all the books that I read, I felt like, I've read all the books. I'm going to do great at marriage. And then you get into it and you find out who you really are.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Michael, to answer your question, part up to it. So I would say our first ones would take about an hour.
Oh yeah, I didn't finish.
They would take about an hour, but I think they got down to more the 30-minute level. Once we got good at doing it. And I think where Danielle was headed is, when you get good at this skill, you'll do it. You might, when a frustration comes up, you can share it. You could say, hey, honey, it's an hour before bedtime. Hey, honey, can we talk about what happened a couple hours ago? And because you have the confidence that it's not going to be this knockdown, drag out, it's actually going to be a healthy conversation. It's going to bring you closer together. You can do in that time. So as you do them some during the week, the weekly check-in is not as long either, right?
Yeah.
But he just brought up a good point about, before bed. There's two things I want to discuss there or at least mention, is the acronym HALT. Do not have this conversation when you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Now, you young parents, I know you're like, when are we not tired?
Always tired.
When you are the least tired, okay?
Yeah.
When you are the least tired. And there's also this belief, and I believe it comes from scripture, that we're gonna, if at night before bed, we are going to fight this out till it's done, right? We're going to stay up till 2 a.m. to finish this. And the scripture says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. So couples feel like we need to fight this out and get this resolved.
Right.
But when I really looked at that scripture, it says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. It's not your spouse's responsibility for your anger. So the best thing you can do biology wise, because we're a big believer in the brain and the science of how what happens to us when we get upset, the best thing you can do is get a good night's sleep. It will take all those stress hormones will be reabsorbed into your system, and you're going to have a different perspective in the morning after a good night's sleep. Yeah,
that's good. That's great advice. So I promise I have one more question about the habit of this check-in. So a lot of times when people start doing something, physical fitness, weight loss, whatever it is, they finally hit their goal and they kind of stop, and they may slide back and, go ahead and get that ice cream or whatever it may be. And so I guess my question on this is, after you get good at doing this check-in and both partners are feeling good, I mean, there might be a thing, oh, we're fine, we don't need to do that. Or do you see that, or do you not? Or is it become somewhat, I'm going to use the word, probably shouldn't, addictive, where you want to have that conversation every Saturday?
What we see both, right? We see, I would say, a few couples, they see the value, and it's like, wait, we just, they're the type that are disciplined, and they say, wow, we see the value in this. Most couples, and just because of the way we're designed humans, once things are going well, we got good at it, and it's going well, we kind of slack off a little bit, and then guess when we start back? When we have a big negative event, and we didn't resolve it very easily when we have a big negative event, because the events are going to happen, right? We're going to bump into these subconscious wounds, fears, and expectations. It's just going to happen, right?
Yeah. It's one of the first questions we ask a couple when they come back. How have your weekly check-ins been going? And they're like, we haven't had them all summer. Yeah. And so it's not a surprise that a blow up ends up happening. Yeah. So very good. So you need to stick to it as a habit. And the nice thing is with this one is you do have an accountability partner that, that gets up and goes to bed about the same time as you do. So there's always a chance to have that conversation. So that's very good. And we're almost out of time, this has been such a valuable conversation to me as you guys are talking. I'm like, oh yeah, I've done that. Or that happened to me. It just kind of starts triggering things. And by the way, I'm not saying that about Catherine, but it's probably me on the other side that's doing that to her more so. But it is very enlightening, and it's very important because of that 69% you said, and even more terrifying, 85% that you mentioned. That I mean, think about that. 15% of the couples are happy. I mean, and thriving. That's a sad state. And this, while it's not simple because it's hard conversations, it's inspecting yourself and your partner. It's something you have control of, right? You can do this, and those are staggering stats, and this is a great step, I think, and great habit to get towards being an intentional marriage, right? So why don't we start there? I've got a couple other wrap-up questions for you both, but somebody wants to engage with intentional marriages, learn about your program. It is a nonprofit, so there's a lot of benefit to that. So how do they find you? Where are the best place to look you up? Our website is the best place. It's intentional, being intentional in your marriage, but marriages with an S, intentionalmarriages.net.
Yep. Okay. And then I'm going to ask you this, Danielle. I love your content. You make great, thoughtful videos. I'm curious, as a habit builder myself, how do you come up with ideas and how do you keep motivated?
Well, Russ messes up and I write about it.
I knew she was going to say that. I knew she was going to say that.
You are a content machine, Russ.
I'm a content machine. I'm a content machine. And the beauty of working with 300 couples, they help us with some content as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because we find these things that have helped us so much, and I didn't grow up with this, and it's no fault of my parents. Their parents didn't model it for them. We just want to pay this forward. Like this is making such a difference for us, and we're seeing it make a difference for the couples we're working with. We just want to, get it out to as many people as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great message. And then Russ, I wanted to ask you a question. You and I worked together at a company years ago, and it was a great time in my career and hopefully yours too.
Absolutely.
If a salesperson is listening to this today, what would be one sales habit you would advise them to get?
So, we feel the key to marriage is emotional intelligence, right? And emotional intelligence, when I was in 20 years old, my early 20s, wasn't even a term. So I think the most important thing a sales rep can do is work on their emotional intelligence, right? Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, said 2 words separate successful people from all other people. And it wasn't work ethic or skill set. And both of those are important at Microsoft and wherever else. But he said emotional intelligence is the most important thing. So if I was to tell a sales rep, it'd be work on your emotional intelligence. The better you do, your sales are going to grow.
Yeah, perfect.
And your marriage is going to get better. And your marriage is going to get better.
Exactly. That's what you're almost talking about, marriage intelligence based on this check-in is what you're developing together, right? Is emotional intelligence, but as a group. So last thing is how fun is it being a grandparent? I'm enjoying it. I've got a 1.5-year-old.
Oh, we can't stop smiling.
We have. She's not quite. She's about 7-8 weeks old, and we've already been to Los. We live in Atlanta. We've already been to Los Angeles twice to see her.
Nice.
She was married December 5th, and people are like, "Have you seen her yet?" And I'm like, "We've been there twice already." And I'm like, "When do we get to go back?" Yes,
exactly. It's a great thing, and then for a lot of reasons, it's a wonderful feeling. So, not to mention they're cute, and when they dirty their diaper, they can go back to dad. In my case,
exactly.
And we love watching our son and daughter-in-law become new parents and interact with each other. I mean, we're just so proud of them.
Yeah, exactly. That's so good. So Danielle said find them on intentionalmarriages.net, but I would also encourage you to find them on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, because they share content there too. So if you're in one of those channels, I would urge anybody to find them and watch, just listen to their content, because it's helpful to me every time I see it. And I always do stop and see it. So thank you so much for joining The Habit Architect. It's so good to talk to you. It's such an important topic. I really appreciate so much your time and you sharing with us today. Thank you so much,
Michael,
for that.
Thank you for this opportunity. We loved it. We really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you. Maybe we can do it again sometime. And I know I'm going to share this with Catherine. She's a teacher, so she's probably not able to see it now, but we'll make sure she sees it, and we'll have a good conversation beyond that. For everybody listening, thank you so much for showing up and sharing. Please do go subscribe to this podcast if you're interested. Next week, I have Nandan will be on. He was first an automation expert. Now he's certainly, like everybody, in AI, but he is an expert. He creates cheat sheets and tips and lessons on how to embrace technology and everything you do. So I'm looking forward to Nandan joining us next week. So that'll be again next Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Time, that is. So thanks again for joining, Russ and Danielle. Great to see you. Take care. Let's stay in touch.